Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian. The Trojan horse probably never existed. And that famous story about Einstein failing math? Completely made up by a reporter who couldn't read Swiss grades. History is full of moments you were taught as fact that turn out to be fiction, invented by artists, twisted by biographers, or just repeated so many times that nobody bothered checking the source. These are 20 famous historical facts that were fabricated from start to finish, and some of them are going to genuinely bother you. Number 20. Einstein failed math in school. This is the ultimate underdog story, plastered across motivational posters in every guidance counselor's office on the planet. The idea that the greatest genius of the 20th century couldn't handle basic arithmetic as a kid, and if he could figure it out, so could you. Except Einstein was spectacular at math. By 12 years old, he had already powered through algebra and calculus on his own. His teachers in Munich described him as far ahead of the rest of the class. When his family moved to Switzerland, he scored the highest marks in math and science on his entrance exam to the Zurich Polytechnic. So where did this myth even start? A reporter in 1984 misread Switzerland's grading system, where 6 is the highest score, not the lowest. American readers saw Einstein's 6s and assumed those were failing marks. The story took off overnight. Einstein's entire career was built on being extraordinary with numbers, and this myth somehow survived anyway. Number 19. Vikings wore horned helmets. The image is iconic. A massive Norse warrior leaping off a long ship with 2 giant horns curving from his iron helmet, looking absolutely terrifying. It makes for incredible cinema. But archaeologists have found exactly one authentic Viking helmet ever, and it's a plain, rounded iron dome with a simple nose guard. No horns, not even small ones. A Swedish artist named Gustav Malmström drew Vikings with horned helmets in 1820 for an illustrated poem, and the look was simply too dramatic to let go of. Opera costumes picked it up first, then theme parks, then airport gift shops, all horned, all completely wrong. The real Vikings would have found the horns impractical at best and laughable at worst. Number 18. Humans only use 10% of their brains. Brain imaging technology killed this one a long time ago. Functional MRI scans show we use virtually all of our brain, and most regions are active at almost any given moment. Different areas handle different tasks, motor functions, language, memory, emotional processing, but there is no giant dormant section waiting for the right self-help book to flip the switch. Even when you're sleeping, your brain is running maintenance, consolidating memories, and cleaning out cellular waste. The myth traces back to psychologist William James, who said in the 19th century that people only meet a small fraction of their mental potential. That's a statement about ambition and effort, not anatomy. But decades of retellings warped it into a fake statistic that sounded scientific enough to stick. Suddenly, every action movie had a character unlocking the other 90% and gaining telekinesis. The motivational poster industry ran with it too, and they're still running. But those are recent myths. The next few go back centuries, and they rewrote entire national identities. Number 17. Walt Disney was cryogenically frozen. The legend says his body was secretly preserved after death, stored somewhere beneath Disneyland, waiting for future science to bring him back. Sounds exactly like something Disney would plan. In reality, he was cremated 4 days after dying on December 17th, 1966. His ashes are at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, which you can visit if you want to see for yourself. The first person actually cryonically frozen was James Bedford in January 1967, a full month after Disney died. The timeline doesn't even work. But the idea felt so perfectly on brand for the man who built a kingdom on magic and immortality that people wanted it to be true more than they wanted to check. Number 16. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei went to orbit in 2003 on China's first crewed spaceflight and was asked about this the moment he landed. He said he couldn't see the wall anywhere. NASA confirmed it shortly after. The wall stretches thousands of miles, but it's only about 15 to 30 feet wide. That's narrower than a 2-lane highway, and nobody claims you can spot your local freeway from the International Space Station. This myth first appeared in a British almanac in 1932, which was 3 full decades before anyone had actually left the atmosphere to verify it. The author was guessing. Everyone just believed him. Number 15. Bulls charge because they're enraged by the color red. Bulls are actually colorblind to red. They can't distinguish it from green or brown. Scientists tested this by presenting bulls with capes of different colors, and the animals charged at all of them equally. What triggers the charge is the movement of the cape, not the color. A neon green sheet waved the same way would produce the exact same reaction. The red cape exists because it hides bloodstains during the fight, which is a grim little practical detail that the tourism brochures tend to leave out entirely. Number 14. Betsy Ross sewed the first American flag. The whole story was invented by her grandson, William Canby, who presented it to a historical society in 1870. That was 94 years after it supposedly happened, and his evidence was what elderly relatives claimed to remember from family conversations. No document from the actual Revolutionary period mentions Betsy Ross in connection with the flag. Not a letter, not a receipt, not a diary entry, nothing. But once the story reached the public, it was too patriotic and too tidy to question. It gave the flag a face and a sewing machine, and that was enough. If these smaller myths surprised you, the ones coming up start rewriting entire chapters of history. And number 1 is a story so famous it shaped how civilizations think about war itself. Number 13, an apple hit Isaac Newton on the head, and he discovered gravity. Newton himself never claimed any fruit made contact with his skull. What he described to his friend William Stukeley late in life was simply watching an apple fall from a tree and wondering why it always dropped straight down rather than sideways or upward. A man looked at falling fruit and had a thought. That's the whole story. Later biographers in the early 1800s decided that a quiet observation wasn't dramatic enough for the man who reshaped physics, so they added a bonk. It made better dinner conversation. The apple was real. The concussion was invented by people who needed a better anecdote. Number 12. Columbus sailed west to prove the earth was round. This one falls apart immediately. Educated Europeans had known the earth was spherical since the ancient Greeks figured it out over 1,000 years earlier. Eratosthenes had even calculated the earth's circumference with startling accuracy back in 240 BC. The actual argument Columbus had with Spanish royal advisors wasn't about shape at all. It was about size. Columbus insisted the planet was much smaller than it actually is, roughly a third of its true circumference. His advisors told him he was wrong. His advisors were completely correct. Columbus survived his catastrophic miscalculation only because an entire continent nobody in Europe knew about happened to be sitting in the ocean where he expected to find Asia. He reached the Caribbean, declared it the East Indies, called the indigenous people Indians, and died still convinced he'd found a shortcut to Japan. The brave flat earth debunker narrative was invented centuries later to make a better origin story for the age of exploration. Number 11. Medieval people all died before 40. This statistic gets absolutely destroyed by context. Infant and childhood mortality rates in medieval Europe were devastating, and those early deaths dragged the average lifespan figure down catastrophically. But if you actually survived to adulthood, reaching your 50s or 60s was perfectly normal. Geoffrey Chaucer lived to around 60. Eleanor of Aquitaine made it to approximately 82 and was still orchestrating political alliances in her final years. Saying medieval adults were elderly at 35 is like reporting that the average depth of a swimming pool is 3 feet because you included the kiddie section in your calculation. Number 10. The Great Fire of London started because a baker left his oven on. The fire did begin on Pudding Lane in September 1666, and a bakery owned by Thomas Fariner was involved. The blaze destroyed over 13,000 houses, nearly 90 churches, and left tens of thousands of Londoners homeless. But Fariner swore until his death that he had properly extinguished his ovens that night. A French watchmaker named Robert Hubert confessed to deliberately starting the blaze as an act of foreign sabotage and was promptly hanged for it. One problem: Hubert hadn't even arrived in London until 2 days after the fire started. Several witnesses confirmed this. His confession made zero sense, but London needed someone to blame, and a Frenchman was a convenient target. The actual cause of the Great Fire remains genuinely unknown to this day. A careless baker made a better story than an unsolved mystery, so that's the version that survived. Number 9. Pocahontas and John Smith were lovers. Disney cemented this into the cultural imagination as a sweeping cross-cultural romance between a bold explorer and a beautiful native princess. The animated film won an Academy Award. The love story became the default version millions of people carry in their heads. The reality collapses that image instantly. Smith was around 27 when they met. Pocahontas was approximately 10 or 11 years old. Smith himself described her as a child in his own journals, referring to her bringing food and playing with the boys at the fort. Their actual interactions involved a young girl helping arrange food exchanges between the Powhatan people and desperate English settlers who were starving. She did eventually marry an Englishman named John Rolfe as an adult, traveled to England, was presented to King James, and died at age 21 before she could return home. But the romance with Smith? That was Disney, not history. If you're finding this interesting, hit subscribe. I break down history like this every week, and the entries coming up are the ones that genuinely reshape how you see the ancient world. Number 8. Napoleon lost Waterloo because of arrogance and catastrophic tactical blunders. A detail that tends to get buried in the dramatic retellings is that Napoleon was seriously ill on June 18, 1815. Possibly hemorrhoids, possibly a severe stomach condition. Either way, he could barely ride his horse that morning. He delegated major battlefield decisions to subordinates, particularly Marshal Ney, who then committed the actual errors that cost France the battle. Ney launched repeated cavalry charges against unbroken infantry squares without artillery support. The infamous delay in starting the morning attack happened partly because Napoleon was physically incapacitated. History attributes the defeat entirely to ego and strategic overreach. A more honest version is that a man who could barely sit upright sent other people to fight Wellington while he tried to stay conscious in a nearby farmhouse. Number 7. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776. You have celebrated this your entire life with fireworks and barbecue, all commemorating the day the Founding Fathers gathered in a room and put their signatures on the most consequential document in American history. Congress actually voted to approve independence on July 2nd. John Adams was so confident about this that he wrote to his wife Abigail predicting July 2nd would become the great American holiday, celebrated with fireworks, parades, and festivities for generations. He was off by 2 days. The physical parchment wasn't signed by most delegates until August 2nd, nearly a full month later. Some delegates signed even later than that, and a few who were present on July 4th never signed at all. July 4th is the date the final edited text was approved for printing, which is significant, but it's not the dramatic communal signing ceremony in the famous painting. That image of every founder gathered together with quills on the same afternoon is almost entirely fictional. Number 6. The Iron Maiden was a medieval torture device. That spike-lined coffin cabinet from horror movies and museum exhibits looks authentically terrifying. You close the doors, and dozens of iron spikes slowly pierce the person locked inside. It's become one of the most iconic symbols of medieval cruelty. Most historians now believe Iron Maidens were assembled in the 18th and 19th centuries by antique dealers and museum curators who cobbled together unrelated medieval artifacts to create something dramatic enough to sell admission tickets. The oldest known example appeared in a German museum in the early 1800s, conveniently right when the Gothic horror genre was exploding in popularity. No medieval document anywhere describes their use as actual punishment instruments. Not one court record, not one execution inventory. They were Victorian novelty props successfully marketed as ancient horrors. The marketing campaign just happened to last 300 years and spawned a heavy metal band along the way. Number 5. Thumbs up meant spare him in Roman gladiator fights. The image is burned into popular culture. The roaring crowd, the emperor on his throne, thumb raised to save a life or pointing down to end one. The Latin phrase from ancient sources is pollis verso, which translates roughly to with a turned thumb. Classical historians now believe a thumb pointing sideways or outward signaled death, while a closed fist with the thumb tucked inside meant spare the fighter. The thumbs up as a general symbol of approval was largely popularized by American soldiers during the 20th century and then cemented into the ancient Rome narrative by Hollywood, because test audiences understood it immediately. Ridley Scott used it in Gladiator. Every Roman epic since has copied it. Every single one of them got this gesture completely backwards. Number 4. Lady Godiva rode naked through the streets of Coventry to protest her husband's crushing taxes on the local population. It's been referenced in medieval paintings, car commercials, and basically every list of history's most dramatic one-woman protests. The first written account appeared roughly 100 years after it supposedly happened, in the work of a monk named Roger of Wendover, who was not known for letting facts get in the way of a compelling story. The Peeping Tom edition, where a tailor bores a hole in his shutters to spy on the naked countess and is struck blind as divine punishment, was layered on even later in the 17th century. That character is actually where the English expression Peeping Tom comes from. The real Lady Godiva was a genuine historical figure and a significant landowner in 11th century England who made substantial donations to monasteries and churches. But no document from anywhere near her actual lifetime mentions this ride. She existed. The naked civic protest was someone else's creative writing exercise that became a national legend. Number 3. Caligula appointed his horse as a Roman consul. This is the go-to example of an emperor so completely unhinged, he gave a literal animal one of the highest political offices in the Roman Empire, and everyone just had to accept it. What the sources actually describe is Caligula threatening to make his horse Incitatus a consul, specifically to humiliate the Senate. The message was that their highest office had become so meaningless, a horse could do the job equally competently. That's calculated political mockery, not genuine insanity. There is a significant difference between the two. The historians recording this story, primarily Suetonius and Cassius Dio, were writing decades after Caligula's assassination, funded by political successors who preferred the completely unhinged madman narrative. The crazier Caligula looked in the history books, the more legitimate his overthrow appeared. He was a brutal ruler by any standard. But the horse was a rhetorical weapon, not a sincere administrative decision anyone attempted to follow through on. Number 2. William Tell shot an apple off his son's head with a crossbow. The foundational legend of Swiss independence and national courage. A master marksman, forced by a tyrannical Austrian governor to shoot a piece of fruit balanced on his own child's skull or face execution. One small issue. There is no historical evidence William Tell existed as a real person. The earliest written version of the story appears in a chronicle from 1470, roughly 150 years after the supposed events, and nearly identical apple shooting stories appear in Norse mythology and Danish folklore that predate the Swiss version by centuries. The tale of Toko in the Gesta Danorum is almost scene for scene the same narrative, just set in Scandinavia. Switzerland's beloved national hero was almost certainly borrowed from Scandinavian legend and relocated to the Alps with a crossbow and a suitably tyrannical Austrian governor. The Swiss government has quietly acknowledged this at various points, but saying it loudly tends to upset people. And number 1, the Trojan horse. the single most famous act of military deception in human history. Greek soldiers folded inside a massive wooden horse, crouching silently in the dark, waiting for the gates of Troy to open so they could pour out and end a 10-year siege in a single night. The image has survived for 3,000 years, but the Trojan horse does not appear in the Iliad at all. It shows up as a brief mention in the Odyssey and receives its full dramatic treatment in Virgil's Aeneid, written around 19 BC. That's more than 1,000 years after Troy supposedly fell. Archaeologists who spent decades excavating the actual ruins of Troy found no evidence that a giant wooden structure played any role in the city's destruction. The horse might be a metaphor for a siege engine, it might be pure invention, but the version everyone pictures, soldiers packed inside a hollow statue waiting for nightfall, was almost certainly written by someone who lived a millennium after the fact and decided the real ending needed considerably more drama. 20 moments taught as history, all of them either invented, distorted, or borrowed from someone else's legend entirely. From a Swiss national hero, who was probably Danish, to a torture device built by Victorian gift shop owners, to the most famous military trick in history that was written 1,000 years after the war ended. And this was only part 1. I'm covering 20 more in the next video, and some of those are going to be even harder to accept. Subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops.